Right, so this topic's an absolute beast then. This is the body's defences and vaccinations. So this is what most immunity questions are on. So it's important before we get started to make sure we're clear about the terminology that we're going to use here. A microbe is a microscopic organism. A pathogen, though, was a microscopic organism that can cause disease. So we said there are three types: bacteria, viruses, and fungi. A lymphocyte is a white blood cell that produces antibodies, and a phagocyte was a white blood cell that destroys pathogens by engulfing and destroying them. An antigen was a protein found on the surface of the pathogens. An antibody is a protein produced by lymphocytes which has a matching shape to specific antigens. Now, it's really important that you spend a little bit of time making sure that you're familiar with these terms and you can say what they are really quickly. Because at certain points, we're going to be talking about them all and it can get really confusing really quickly. So pause it here, practice writing these out and make sure you know what each one is and give yourself a little quiz on it. Now, once you've done that, let's go on to the next little part. So the body's defences. Your body's adapted to prevent infection in two main ways. Firstly, it tries to stop pathogens from entering the body, which can make it sick. And the second way it's adapted to prevent infection is kill them if they do start to spread in the blood. So it can sort of be summarised in this little diagram. There's barriers to entry, which stops microbes entering the body in the first place. So the first example is the skin, which acts as a barrier. The second one is mucous membranes. So this is using mucus to trap microbes. So a good example of this would be in the respiratory system, where there are goblet cells that produce mucus, and there's also cilia, which will beat and try and move the mucus up, which has got the microbes trapped in it. There's also blood clotting. So when you get a cut, a blood clot forms and it forms a barrier at wounds. So otherwise, if this didn't form, there's basically a big wide open door where pathogens could enter the bloodstream. So your blood clots, not only to stop you bleeding to death, but also to act as a barrier to any pathogens. We've also got stomach acid, which kills any bacteria or microbes in our food. And there's also enzymes in tears, which will also break down and kill or destroy any pathogens. The second line of defense then is the blood system. So this is used to treat or kill any pathogens which have already entered the bloodstream. So the first one we've got is lymphocytes. Now, lymphocytes produce antibodies which have a complementary shape to antigens and clump the pathogen. And phagocytes then engulf and digest microbes using enzymes. Now, we're not really going to look at this side in much more detail because that's basically just these 5 points. This is how the body stops these microbes entering. But we're going to look in more detail about these two, the lymphocytes and phagocytes, and how they work. So up first is this: antigens and antibodies. Now, antibodies are produced by lymphocytes. And I should say there that they're produced by specific lymphocytes. So only certain lymphocytes can produce certain antibodies. You basically have lots and lots of different types of lymphocytes floating around in your blood, and each one will produce its own specific type of antibody. Now, they will produce antibodies which have a similar shape to these antigens. Antigens are proteins found on the surface of pathogens, or we can say they're found on the surface of microbes. Now, this diagram shows how only certain antibodies can join up with certain antigens. So this structure here is one antibody. It has a little site here which will fit together with this antigen because they have a complementary shape, which means that they have a shape that fits together. This second antibody can only join to this antigen because only this antigen will fit into this antibody. So again, these two have a complementary shape. Now, this bit shows their actual role in immunity and fighting infection. So, as I say, the microbes or the pathogens have these little proteins on their surface. So this little microbe has 4 antigens on its surface. They are little proteins, and they tell the white blood cell that this does not belong to my body. So when these get into your body, your lymphocytes recognize them, and they start to produce antibodies which have a complementary shape to the antigen. The antibodies will then clump together with the antigen, and they will immobilize the pathogen and stop it moving around and spreading the infection. So this is the process. The antibodies which are produced by the lymphocytes have a shape that matches or is complementary to the shape of the antigens on the microbes. They join with the antigens and cause them to clump together. Once they're clumped, they are easily engulfed and digested by the second type of white blood cell, which is a phagocyte. Now, when antibodies act, the pathogen can no longer spread and our symptoms start to reduce. So once you stop this microbe travelling around your body and spreading, that's when you'll start to get better after an infection. So if you're trying to explain this, there's a few points that you need to include. Antibodies are produced by lymphocytes. They have a complementary shape, and you need to use that word. So antibodies have a complementary shape to the antigens, which are on the microbes. The antigens and antibodies will clump together. The microbes will be immobilized so that they can be much easier engulfed and destroyed by phagocytes. And those are the main words that you need to include. So again, this just shows another little diagram. So this here is our lymphocyte. It produces the antibodies which will join on to the antigens on the surface of the microbe and cause it to become immobilized. The next type of white blood cell is a phagocyte. So it has a slightly different nucleus. If you look back at the lymphocyte, it had a big large nucleus which took up most of the cell, whereas the phagocyte has a lobe nucleus, which basically means it has a part here, 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 and here. So different little lobes. Now phagocytes work differently. They're still found in the blood, but how they work is shown in this diagram. So here's the phagocyte, here's the bacteria. The phagocyte surrounds and engulfs the bacteria, and then the phagocyte digests the bacteria using enzymes. So this bit here is the important part. Now up here you can actually see a phagocyte chasing the little black dot, which is the bacteria, and then it surrounds it, engulfs it, and after a bit of time it's going to digest it. And up in this corner, this just shows a little animation. So the big oval shape is the phagocyte, the little green shape is the microbe. It engulfs it and it's going to digest it.